What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. This is the Elder Scrolls podcast. I'm Scott here with Michael and Drew as always. And for today, we've got a fun one. We are ranking your spicy Elder Scrolls takes. We made a post on YouTube and I also tweeted it out. So we're gathering response from both YouTube and Twitter, and some are spicy, some are fairly cool, to be honest, but we're basically going to sort of pick our favorites because there was a lot, and we're going to kind of take one, see whether it's actually spicy or not, but then we can kind of discuss.
Depends on the Scovilles. We want proper we want people to be a little bit upset with your opinion.
Yeah.
That's a spicy take.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there were a lot of comments. Mm-hmm. And if we were to look at every single one and talk about it for just 2 minutes per comment, it would be a 12-hour podcast. And I know you all want that, but we're just going to talk about the best ones.
Check the length of the video. It's going to be 12 hours.
All right. Well, we'll start with YouTube then. This is I cleaned some of the top comment ones, but here's one from Matthew Van Zant. The Elder Scrolls take on half-breeds is probably due to them not wanting to deal with it in the games. It's too complicated for them, so they just have to have them take on take on the race of one or the other, and Breton somewhat led us to believe yada yada. Basically, it's just saying that half-breeds are Bethesda laziness. I don't think that's hot at all.
That is a lukewarm take.
That's spot on, basically. That is that is exactly why it is the way it is.
And I don't think anyone would really...
And I mean, I guess you can add to that and say that a half-elven race like the Bretons are incredibly boring because of that. Part of the reason they're so boring is because they don't really want to deal with all of the, like, kind of the lore contradicts itself with half-breed races. And, oh no, you just look like the mum. That's all that matters.
Here's one from Joe Robbins who says the lore's built-in retcon systems, dragon breaks, etc. aren't bad. They actually keep the series from being too tied down and restricted by its own rules. There's something to be said for remaining true to your lore, but if your lore is hindering cool ideas for your game, then it can and even should be tweaked. If the developers have cool ideas that make the series better in the Elder Scrolls, they're able to just go for it, and I think that's neat.
I think that's a relatively hot take because a lot of people would really disagree with that, I think, because it gets a lot of flame. But I actually personally agree with that take.
To an extent. It's one of those things where it's like you agree with the premise of it where it suits you, but then when they retcon it, it's really,
I guess that's
really
what he's
bad.
saying. The principle is that, like, they actually keep, being too tied down or too restricted by its own rules. Basically just... I guess in the assumption it's good, but he's saying the system in itself isn't bad. Like, for example, if everyone all of a sudden retconned, all the first pocket guide to the Empire, Cyrodiil Jungle, all that kind of stuff that you like, you wouldn't be a bad thing. So basically, I'm like, I tend to agree as long as it doesn't, like, remove the core
Well, also,
themes.
the more you retcon lore, the more you can't really properly trust any lore from then on, because it's like, well, this could just be retcon next, and I don't know. I feel like there's got to be some consistency.
I think
Okay, give me 5 pieces of retconned lore, like the 5 most mainstream, and tell me if they were good choices or not.
I feel like most of them could be chalked up to ESO as a game only works if we retcon this thing.
Yeah, I think, but one thing I do like is that it does... It factors in and helps the unreliable narrator kind of scenario. Do you know what I mean? It actually... Yeah, I reckon it assists it, honestly, for the most part.
I guess
it does, but what's a good retcon?
Well, if a retcon maybe is just like another historian saying he disagrees with this perception of history, then that's not such a bad thing. But
is that a retcon, or is that just a difference of opinion? Because there's a difference between unreliable narrator and actual full-on retcon.
Well, he does.
Right?
Well, kind of, and not really, because technically you can go like, oh, unreliable narrator, first pocket guide to the Empire. That's why it's gone. It is a retcon, but they've sort of explained it away. It's like, oh, these different theories as to why in universe, as to why they referred to it as a jungle. So it's what he said, like the lore's built-in retcon systems, dragon breaks, etc., like other things. So I also kind of like, it's the same thing as some of the best parts, like the 36 lessons of Vivek and Red Mountain and all that kind of stuff is a very convoluted event with lots of different versions and inbuilt. You could almost say that Unreliable Narrator really is a sort of built-in retcon system to a degree.
But if that's the case, like I like Unreliable Narrator.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. And I would agree with the premise of Joe Robbins.
Yeah, some people don't. Like, some people like, for example, there's not really any debate about Mass Effect lore. It's like straight up, here's a codex. It tells you from an, authorial sort of position. Like that's it. That's what it is. But yeah, I don't know. Like I think it's a closer to hot take. Because I think a lot of people don't like it.
I guess the problem with it is that if developers have, quote, cool ideas, which actually suck, and then they kind of override cool lore, people hate that, and I understand that completely.
Here's what's cool. Do you know what you, hopefully and ideally, and I sort of do believe this would happen, say there's an Elder Scrolls 6 Hammerfell, the aesthetic and the look of all the towns and the cities and probably the scale and stuff will be retconned, and there'll be little bits of it and stuff, but they'll take what they want and leave out what they don't. But that's kind of soft retconning something out of relevancy and stuff, you know what I mean? In the same way that they can just leave out plenty of things about like Nordic lore and stuff and don't, because if it's,
but that's a bad thing.
It is.
And it's like when you see Somerset Isles in Elder Scrolls Online, and it looks all like fantasy and generic instead of these glass towers and interesting things. That's the part that I can really understand that people don't like.
You can almost see the games. It's kind of like when you have a book that's adapted to a TV show that's adapted to a film series. It's like, well, they're nothing alike, but they kind of all take inspiration from the source material. And you could maybe say that for the games, like Oblivion being so drastically different to Morrowind, Skyrim being different, ESO being its completely own thing.
Sometimes too, it's also the execution of the changes. So for example, if you were to go like look at Oblivion as it is, like obviously people were expecting a jungle Cyrodiil and all that kind of different stuff. Whereas if you look at the Sky Oblivion mod project, where they're putting it's ultimately a better execution, like from an artistic design and everything like that, you're less unhappy with the decision, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like it's, yeah, I guess that's what I'm sort of getting at. Like it's sort of, I don't know. I do agree to some degree. It's good to have flexibility with unreliable narrator and stuff to allow you to do it, because strictly adhering to just this sort of I think codified lore can create problems and boredom and stuff within the setting, but at the same time, it's about, it ultimately comes down to taste and execution.
Yeah,
like,
I guess you just got to be respectful of the source material, because it's always going to evolve. Yeah. But if you just kind of like spit on the prior lore and completely go another direction, it leaves a sour taste in the mouth of like older fans.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I agree with the premise that I think the systems are actually good. Perhaps how they're used a lot of the time aren't fantastic, but the actual concept of having inbuilt sort of retconning type of things isn't a bad concept. Especially because they leave it up in the air. They don't like go, well, this is the, well, they tend to not, like, this is the new definitive Elder Scrolls. Like, they don't go like, this is the new version of, this is the definitive canon, exactly what it's like. They just kind of go, yeah, all the stuff we've made is canon. They don't really say much on it. Do you know what I mean? But yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of lukewarm takes. They have thumbs up because they're actually just like good suggestions.
I saw some from
I wish you could do what you can do on Reddit, where like someone posts a question that's controversial, but nobody answers with a controversial take because everybody likes it, so it goes to the top. So you have to set it by controversial, and that's when you get the really bad stuff.
Here's a good one. So from Blighted Rapture on Twitter, ESO is the best Elder Scrolls game to date. From the amount of lore added to almost all of Tamriel being able to be explored, the customization of your character, to even the choices available in the quest lines from time to time, the new standard of what to beat in the next game. What do you think?
From ZeniMax's perspective, it is the best Elder Scrolls game financially.
Yeah. No,
for the state of Elder Scrolls, it's the worst by far.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
The only thing I want to throw out some extra credit there for it. This is a spicy take, I would say. Like, most people would just disagree
I've been
with it.
seeing it around, though, eh?
Yeah, but
I've been seeing this.
The problem is, from my opinion, ESO, it goes from the amount of lore. Just an amount of lore isn't the thing. It's also the quality of lore. However, I will say, Elder Scrolls Online is generally hit or miss. Like, when it's good, it's actually really good. When it's bad, it's really bad. And it's kind of, there's a lot of mix of that. And I would say a lot of the later stuff and the stuff that came in the later chapters of the DLCs and so on, tends to be much better than the earlier stuff. A lot of the earlier stuff, foundational stuff's pretty, but I think
ESO can be considered good because it has no competition. It is, for the last 10 years, the last 7 years, it's the only Elder Scrolls game. It calls the shots. we're kind of like, to be fair to Elder Scrolls Online, if it wasn't for Elder Scrolls Online, the community would potentially stagnate a bit. You kind of need fresh things, even if it's not amazing, even if it's just good. It's nice to have something new to be interested in, and that's probably the best thing Elder Scrolls Online has done.
Because I would also say, like, about the actual best game, like, it's not, like, in terms of just a personal opinion to me, like, playing the game, like, my personal just enjoyability of picking up a controller and playing it, it's nowhere near. I just don't like the MMO sort of style and so on. But I guess, to be fair, and this is sometimes it is overlooked, but you can go like, oh, well, Oblivion kind of butchered Cyrodiil and look at that and so on. And it's like, oh, look at, Skyrim to a degree, they butchered elements of the lore. Whereas if you looked at, for example, Elsewhere, I think they did a fairly damn good execution of what Elsewhere should be. And, arguably Somerset, not because of the crystals and so on. But there are basically areas where they have taken culture and they have executed quite well. And, I would even say the Reachmen are executed quite well, even though I'm not a big fan of like the bone sort of stuff too much. I'd rather it scaled back a little bit more of the Celtic, but they're only working off what Skyrim already established. So I think a lot of the time they do a decent job, and it's just easy to, you know what I mean? Like forgive Bethesda's sort of butchering of the lore.
I think most of the criticisms I'd have of ESO isn't even personal towards ESO. It is a criticism I'd levy at just about any MMO. An MMO is such a different style of game that everything that I'd say the three of us and a lot of people who are into the Elder Scrolls, a lot of what draws you in does not work in an MMO nearly as well. You'll never be nearly as immersed in ESO as you will in the other games. And let's be real, I don't think I've done a single quest in ESO that really engaged me. It always feels like, oh, go here, collect this, interact with this, kill this by spamming your spells, and that's about all there is to it.
Sometimes they do. Like, to be fair, sometimes, because I've been playing more recently, maybe it's the more recent stuff, they would say if you actually go back, they're kind of on par, but I would say what's different, a lot of the time, not all the time, but the thing that's different is the intimacy. So when you're there by yourself in the world, that quest, the same kind of quality of writing or structure or something like that, when you're playing it in Skyrim, it feels so more intensely to your character and so on. Whereas if you see you've gone into this like cave with this character and stuff in ESO, and then there's some other dude that's blitzing it by you with 4 mounts and stuff, it kind of doesn't, you no longer feel that this is your intimate experience anymore.
That sums it up.
Yeah.
Like a slight aside, but I remember I wanted to get footage of Azura's statue in ESO because it looks really nice. Design-wise, it looks amazing. I went into that cave to try and get footage of it. I should maybe download the PTS or something, but it took me about 45 minutes to get 10 seconds alone with the statue. It's just people running in, not standing in an immersive, like, in front of the statue. They're like standing on the statue. They've got like their winged twilights and their other Daedral following them around, just zipping about the place. You got a skeleton jumping across the shot, and it's like,
I think I will say as well, because it's an MMO, it also has an MMO map design.
Yeah.
And it feels very different to a single player game where you can just walk over a mountain, or even if you think about a city, like in Elder Scrolls 6, they could build some city where in part of it, in one of the districts, there's all these like winding, like little walkways and little doors you can open into houses and all this kind of stuff. Whereas when you go into a city in the Elder Scrolls Online, you're very aware that you're playing an MMO. Even if you got rid of all the people in the world, it feels very like, here's this zone, here's this zone. There's heaps of empty space, lots of big, archy, aesthetic looking buildings that don't actually do anything. They're just kind of like there to like,
it's like
represent different areas.
It's like
it just doesn't have the same real lived-in feeling that a single-player city would have.
Because it's built
100%.
to like accommodate so much space as well. It doesn't have that sort of like, saying with the big streets and so on. But there's no like the nooks and crannies and stuff aren't there.
Yeah.
And the same as like I was playing the Blackwood stuff, and like the Aelid Ruin doors are huge, and the arena, the place is sort of scaled to this sort of feeling of like, oh, there could be like 10 people in here at one time. We need to make it feel like that and not claustrophobic, which I understand that's a game design thing, but it does kind of like, at least my enjoyment of it does like sort of cut the execution a bit. Though then again, I guess like there's some cool design things in ESO and stuff, like the visuals and stuff, but then it's sort of conformed to that MMO sort of world space, which just doesn't.
The other thing they do as well is powers become very generic. isn't as straightforward. Obviously, we don't understand all the intricacies of like different magic and stuff, but from all the single player games, there is like established lore about kind of how necromancy works, or how summoning a certain type of creature is very difficult, or casting a certain elemental spell. Whereas because it's an MMO, they'll just be like, oh, cast this, and for 5 seconds a big kind of golem reaches out of the ground and goes and then goes back under the ground.
Everything's very like boom, 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 boom in your head. So then, because if everything's boom, 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 you cease to appreciate the scale. You know what I mean? Like, everything becomes. It's like if you're doing something that's not like, a billion like light effects and like huge things everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like casting a master spell is like in Skyrim is like, oh whoa, big deal, but like that's everything in.
So I think, as I said, it's not really necessarily a criticism of ESO as a game. It's kind of a criticism of the MMO format on the Elder Scrolls. That's generally where our problems come from.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make it any less of a good game. It's just so vastly different to the initial draw of the Elder Scrolls universe.
And things like dailies and grindy stuff.
And all your like ridiculous like, pets and all of that kind of stuff. Even trying to like, in the lore, like this Empress Hestra rode a fire storm atronach. And I'm like, really? Like fire storm atronach bear, sorry, I think it was. And it just kind of like, I don't know. That's just not my thing in that regard.
Yeah.
But
you don't want to storm atronach Gua?
No, not really. I don't know if this one's hot. I'll read it. So Skydog, the series and the Elder Scrolls 6 in particular desperately needs someone like Kirkbride to do the writing / world building. Skyrim and Oblivion definitely added some interesting lore, but they don't hold a candle to Morrowind's contributions, in my opinion. If Bethesda doesn't find someone with the same eclectic style to spice things up, I'm afraid the series will eventually lose most of its soul.
I mean, I could see him doing a really good job for Hammerfell in a team of other writers, like no doubt.
It's also,
but that's why I don't think that's a super hot take.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I feel like it's like most people who kind of like the older, sort of a little bit weirder lore. That's a pretty like cool take. Like, I do agree. But one thing too, I guess, like just thinking about ESO just before, but it's just like, in a way, if you think about the contributions of Oblivion and Skyrim, Elder Scrolls Online has added a lot more spice in a lot of areas and gone a little bit. And I think it's also the format of it. They're allowed to do like chapter styles and all that, like chapters, and they're constantly working on it. But they've been allowed to move the lore and work on it and make it a little bit weirder and more focused on rather than toned down, I think.
I think it's safe to say at this point that regardless of whether you personally enjoy it or not, The Elder Scrolls Online has become an important game in the series, like a significant game. Yeah. Like it's left some really good lore for people to kind of enjoy and for Bethesda to work on in the future. I guess the problem is, you kind of go, well, duh, because the game's been around for so many years and they constantly add to it. And at what cost was that to the series too? Because I think, if you think about opportunity cost, you can be like, well, in that time they could have done 5 Skyrim DLCs or Elder Scrolls 6 basically.
Yeah, well, I guess
DLCs. There's all these things they could have done instead.
I guess they say they wouldn't have worked on it anyway because it's Bethesda game studios and stuff. But they also,
you know what I mean.
The franchise health. They're like, ESO's got its covered.
Exactly.
Until the time.
Because even with a different team, if ESO wasn't there as a cash cow, you can see there being much more pressure on, hey guys at BGS, we really want another Elder Scrolls game. It's exactly the same situation with GTA as far as I'm concerned. There's a reason why there's no GTA 6. It's because GTA Online is a money printer. Even if it's the same developers, you can, it's a similar situation.
Yeah, absolutely. This is pretty valid. I don't know if it's hot though, but here we go. Bad Company Sarge. The actual Elder Scrolls themselves are kind of worthless. They seem to just have vague prophecies which may or may not come true, plus they can teleport dragons forward in time as an odd side effect. Really niche uses for items which are seen as super important.
It's a MacGuffin, isn't it? It's formless and it's just a thing to pursue and to care about. But I mean, inherently, anything that deals with time and prophecy is always going to be so ambiguous and nebulous because you can't really do anything with it. Oh, you read a prophecy, does that mean that you've changed the line of the prophecy? Or etc., etc. Or like
Yeah.
everyone's gone
But-
blind and is really quiet, or who actually knows what's in them, and it's yeah. So I agree to an
I
extent.
kind of agree, but I guess you could say that about a lot of things when you just look at what they've done in games. Like if you look at like the Mace of Molag Bal or like, various other Daedric artifacts, they're not all that crazy. I mean, look at Sanguine's Rose. I could make that sound really dull and boring, but you kind of hype it up in your head as, wow, there's all this divine power in this artifact that I don't fully understand, and that's part of it. And I think you could say something similar for Elder Scrolls, that there is a mystery element to it that isn't fully clear. I know they're not imbued with the power of a Daedric prince.
But I guess that's kind of is just like, you could pick up Sanguine's Rose or Mace of Molag Bal and use it as it is like intended to be used, or it's like purpose or whatever. Like anyone could theoretically. With the Elder Scroll, you're probably going to go blind, and if you don't go blind, you're going to get some vague prophecy that you're like kind of like, how do I, you know what I mean?
And I think it's just good lore in general, because it is a theme of the Elder Scrolls that there's lots of things from Aetherius and the Orbis and beyond that do kind of seep into the mortal realm. You've got people who are able to ascend or achieve Kim or something like that. You've got figures who may or may not be godlike in some way, like Maik the Liar, and there's elements of like, what's going on here? It's not, everything's not as it seems, and having the Elder Scrolls be like a conduit between the stable mortal realm and what lies beyond is kind of like, I mean, it's good to have, and it's a really cool concept, at least in terms of the lore.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, I think they're overrated.
Yeah,
as being used for the title of the game series. I suppose.
I guess so. I don't really think about them that often. When I hear Elder Scrolls, I just think the series.
It's just a good title.
Yeah. Okay, here's one. Urgoth Gaming. Morrowind was the worst thing to happen to Elder Scrolls main quest design. With the introduction of Dragon Breaks to solve the canonical ending of Daggerfall, it forged BGS to form linear main quests with only one outcome, as to not upset the player base. Discuss. It's definitely a hot take, I think, because people would be like...
I mean, the games were always going to evolve drastically over time.
I think overall, the big thing that's and this is what people who are really big on the Arena Daggerfall kind of thing, it is the change from like a really true sandbox feeling to a little bit more of a focused sandbox. It's more about the immersive world plus sandbox. It's a bit different.
Imagine if they did it like Mass Effect save style, and you actually like play through every Elder Scrolls game with your choices continuing into the next.
That just sounds like such a hassle.
It would never
such
happen.
A company that makes such buggy games already. Like, imagine dealing with that. Yeah. But I reckon, if anything, I reckon though they have actually kind of gone back. Like, it's Skyrim, which is like years ago now, in terms of multiple outcomes, and then you've got also Fallout 4 in terms of multiple outcomes. They do actually have different choices, like Stormcloaks or Imperials, or you've got like Brotherhood, Railroad, so on. So I think Bethesda's game design is actually in on that, and I won't be surprised if Starfield has the same thing, like you will change the end state of the world, or probably same thing with Elder Scrolls 6. I don't think. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think it actually was the worst thing to happen, because...
I guess it's just not for main quests as much, though.
Yeah.
Like Fallout 4, sure. But when are we going to get a Fallout 5? I guess the whole idea is you have to pick somewhat safe things, because you can't have dragon breaks every single game.
It's just a design philosophy that I come down to. It's kind of like if you're going like, you can have like a linear, you can have a mix of these, but there's on both extremes, there's sort of choice. You can go linear path, and then it goes branches, and then it branches again 3 ways and branches that way. And there's all these branches. You create like a family tree looking thing of choices. Or, which is kind of like what you kind of got with Skyrim. It's like, you put in the middle, you're on a turntable, and there's just a million different directions you can go. That's your choice of what to do. So, I'm a character, I want to go be a thief and an assassin and that. Or I want to go and be a mage and collect powerful artifacts. So the game isn't going like, here is your like point of making a choice, which is then going to further take you down a linear path. One of 2 linear paths, and then turn into, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, you have 2 ways of doing choice, and it's just different kinds of games. Like, one is like an immersive sort of sandbox RPG, like living in the Elder Scrolls world sim, versus something that's like a more tailored kind of story.
I guess they do give you choices in, games after Daggerfall, like Morrowind and onwards, in terms of like guilds and side stuff
Yeah.
still, and it just becomes obscure. Like, oh, you don't know what was the canon choice in X guild in Morrowind when you're playing Skyrim.
Yeah. I just think it's also in the design. It's like I mean, I don't really agree. I just think overall it's better that not everything has to revolve around the main story. And I know Daggerfall didn't entirely, but like the outcome of the main story is a big deal. Like it changes the fate of the Iliac Bay and so on. Whereas really, Alduin or the Oblivion Crisis are sort of like threats outside of like the politics of the world. They're not like shaping the everyday man's life. They just get rid of the big bad evil thing.
Also, while it's an interesting hypothetical, you have to construct such an elaborate alternative history, like alternative reality, that you almost can't possibly compare the way the Elder Scrolls did go with how it could have gone in this guy's kind of like what view of how he wanted it to go. It's like the games could have sucked. It could have not translated well over the generations of games.
I'll take a handcrafted land map any day over Daggerfall's generated stuff.
Yeah.
I though also I appreciate the sort of sandboxish sort of like if you were to go like for example like Kenshi is probably closer in game design philosophy to Daggerfall in that way that you go and you just sort of exist and do what you want in the world, but you're not you're not an important character, but you do become in Daggerfall. But you know what I mean in terms of just it's not like structured.
I've got a hot take to read.
Okay, I thought that was like, all right.
Not my hot take.
Yeah.
It's from Zuzana Nagadowska, and it says it has 38 thumbs up on YouTube though, so it's not as much. It's actually hard to properly roleplay in Skyrim. It takes a lot of modding and suspension of disbelief to make each playthrough feel different, even if you experiment with various builds. Now, I don't know, because maybe I'm biased because I'm very good at suspending disbelief because I've been role-playing for many, many years and I kind of just do that. But it took me a long time and many, many, many Skyrim builds before I had to mod to like have it feel fresh. I mean, I know what people mean when they say that, especially when you look at things like dialogue. Because dialogue in Skyrim and Elder Scrolls in general isn't super like distinctive for your character. It doesn't feel like you're playing Fallout New Vegas, for example, where there's often more things you can say. Yeah. I mean, I found it very easy to roleplay a lot in Skyrim.
Yeah, I think the cool take you can take out of that is that some of the quest lines, most specifically the main quest line, do a really good job of forcing you into one role.
Yeah.
I'd say if you had to distill a popular take out of that, it would be that. But generally speaking, so long as you're capable of suspending your disbelief of ignoring a main quest, which a lot of times role-playing does involve doing that, then it's not I don't think it's terribly hard.
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing. Like a lot of role playing and all role playing, I guess, is like it's in your head, right? You've got a lot of stuff. But guess what? Where role playing comes from, like you're sitting around at the table with pen and paper. It's like a lot of that's in your head too. Like a lot of it. If anything, the game is like all of it. So you're always going to have to do things in your head or make decisions, like enforce your own decision. Like a lot of role playing is imparting your own decisions on the character that don't exist within game constraints.
It's like role-playing in the bedroom. You have to pretend there's another person there and it's not just you and you're not a sad loser. No, you get my point. It's same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to suspend your disbelief.
Yeah.
Thank you for your insight. Very valuable.
Man. All right. Let's quickly
give us a new take.
Oh no, guys, just stew on that. Just stew on that, everyone. Just while we find a new one.
Pause for reflection. Okay, Vitality. Hot take here. Orcma is the best race on Tamriel that goes unnoticed. They have a grand creation story with many different ways of interpreting it. Even city orcs are more interesting than most of the races of men. Who is more interesting, an imperial merchant or an orc armorer making arms and armor for adventurers strolling around in the world? Don't worry, Drew, there are others out there that rate this race among the highest in accordance to lore and storytelling. Not a crazy hot take.
I mean,
they just really love orcs.
I mean,
orcs are cool.
Like some of my most spent time characters outside of Dark Elf was an orc in Skyrim, and I've really liked orcs since Oblivion. It was like my first character, and I really like orcs. But I do, I guess like it could easily become a favorite with more. I just want that Mongolian sort of style.
I think
But, like-
I think the main part of their hot take saying that it's the best race that goes unnoticed is like you could.
I agree.
Like you could rate it highly as at least one of the most underrated.
Oh, it's
races.
definitely underrated.
Yeah.
I think so for sure. Like, and
I think-
unnoticed. So, sorry, go on.
Like almost all the races, you could say all the races have really interesting lore, history, background, etc., etc. But there is something about playing an orc that fits really well to a player character, you know, because they are inherently somewhat outcasts and they have an interesting role in society. They're almost like, they are kind of like the player characters in a sense, because they don't really fit in, mesh in well as NPCs. Just like if you had to think of, say, an armorer in a city, it's like, you know, that orcish armorer is going to have an interesting story because he's kind of had to find a way to fit into the empire and etc.
Yeah,
you know,
they're not the most accepted.
they
group in
don't
most-
fit in as well as most races, so it's interesting to play as one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I will agree they're not my like favorite race, but they're definitely underrated. Sort of good one.
Mhm.
Pretty.
Okay. Darkra Let's Play says the moons are getting closer. Their images grow in size chronologically from Elder Scrolls Morrowind to Oblivion to Skyrim, and therefore some future Elder Scrolls game will be about them being about to crash into Nirn.
Basically, Majora's Mask.
I feel like that's not a hot take. It's more like just a whack theory.
Well, that's their hot take. I don't know. I would be surprised, but you never know. I could see it as a quest, maybe like big. Nah, I kind of can't. I don't know. Anyway, I'm happy to move on. If you
Okay.
two are. I don't have too much to say there. I mean, you could have some end of Mages Guild storyline thing where they're like, stop the moons. But anyway, Emmett Larson says, and this is an interesting one, I think. It's about the graphical style. And it says, Elder Scrolls 6 shouldn't look as realistic as possible. That would be boring even with the new tech. It's a fantasy world. It needs some kind of artistic style that will set it apart from all other games that are using hyper-real graphics.
I agree.
Like, basically, perhaps making it kind of, I don't know, cartoony. The only thing I will say is that Elder Scrolls already has its own style that you could throw hyper-realistic kind of
I'm going to say
textures onto, and it would look really good. Like, a Khajiit, for example, is not going to suddenly look like the cat in a cat food ad just because there's hyper-realistic graphics. Like, it should still look like a very unique Elder Scrolls
Yeah.
thing.
it's going to look
Yeah,
like
it's somewhere in
Borderlands 2.
between.
It's all cel-shaded and stuff.
Yeah, nah.
I kind of disagree because I feel like you just end up sort of getting closer to ESO, which you'd say is arguably has a style to it and so on, and it kind of
Yep.
looks a little bit more. I think arguably, Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, I think, all went for a more realistic style depending on their time. It constraints the graphics at the stage. Like, they weren't like, I'm necessarily going stylized. I think Morrowind kind of had a happenstance. It did look like that. And Skyrim was trying to be a grittier, sort of like more realistic look. But obviously you can have like fantastical design without a graphical look. Like, for example, like the High Elves and their like face structure and something is a design choice to make it look interesting and fantasy. But you don't have to have like a graphical sort of, this is a comic style or a sort of like more like Pixar polished, you know what I mean?
I don't think going for a completely different art style to what we're used to is a good idea. But yeah, simply playing into differences. Like, you don't want every elven race to essentially look like a photo. I don't know. Like, they all start to look the same as the graphics have improved.
See, funnily enough, you look at ESO. It's like ESO, like elves look closer to humans in ESO than they do in Skyrim, for example. And also, the other reason I would like them to sort of continue a Skyrim sort of aesthetic look and go forward is and go for a realistic is like, it's been like 15, it's going to be like 15 years since. It's like games are actually at a point now where realistic graphics look really good and really close to real life. Like, dude, don't deny me this and give me some like Borderlands look at all ESO look at
you know when you see one of those videos on YouTube where it's like the most insanely modded up Skyrim that's possible, or Unreal Engine 5, here's Riverwood, or something like that. That would be really cool. I think that as far as it being unique and like no other game, just use do it with design. It doesn't need to be the graphic style. Like the uniqueness should speak for itself.
I reckon they should go for
I think that's a...
Sorry, you go.
No, I was going to say, I think that's a fair way to look at it. Like, you don't need to implement a drastically different art style, but don't let the fact that you can make photorealistic things that look like real life things, don't let that jeopardize every culture having unique architectural styles and dress styles, and maybe like, you know, their facial structure and body structure being different depending on race. Don't compromise on all that just because you could make it look like, you know,
Scott's
IRL.
being so patient.
Oh,
Just
no,
get it out of
I
your
was just
system.
imagining with like little chibi sort of like anime, like old Pokemon game style heads, and they're all like a top down. But yeah, there's a difference between like your art style of like what applies to everything, like everything in Borderlands 2 adheres to a sort of cell shaded kind of look, as opposed to just different design decisions and stuff like that, of like, you know, making the high elves look like this or that or whatever, that are like fantastical, which I agree with that part, but I kind of want them to go for a more realistic, like just look in terms of like, I want it to look like a not art style sort of overlays or anything, if that makes sense.
Which, to be fair, I don't think any of the Elder Scrolls games have really done.
No.
Like, Oblivion was goofy looking, but it's not like they were trying some bizarre art style. It's just how it kind of came out.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm just having a look. A lot of these takes I just agree with.
So here's one from Nicomodus Edwards. It's part of a bigger thing I want to talk about. But Skyrim was my first Elder Scrolls game, but after going back to play Morrowind or Oblivion, the only way I find Skyrim enjoyable is modding the hell out of it, not even adding lore-breaking, cool or funny mods, just like mods that make the gameplay more enjoyable. I like being magic characters, and Skyrim has all the complexity of an 8-year-old birthday party magician high on OxyContin, but I ain't asking for some D&D level spell variety and complexity. I just want to like magic to feel special. But anyway, it goes on a bit. But I think in general, I guess this is the hot... I feel like this is... we could sum up a lot of people's hot takes when they're like, hot take, Skyrim shit and all the old ones are better, right? I'm like, I'm sorry. If you've spent 300 hours playing a game, you lose the right to call that game shit. Unless your job is literally like, I need to sit here and play the worst games for fun or whatever. It's like... When you get that much enjoyment, it's so crazy when people are like, oh, you know, even if they enjoyed, you know, 80 hours of a game, it's like, dude, that is more than your money's worth. It's a very good game. And I think, honestly, I don't know if this is a hot take, Skyrim is my favorite game to play out of any of the Elder Scrolls. All of the rest of them have some level of clunkiness or some other inhibitions. They are better in other areas for sure, but Skyrim, in terms of like picking up a controller, being in the world, moving around and stuff, I would always prefer playing Skyrim or modding it to make it like better and put in the options and stuff you want. But I think just... there are just some limitations that the old clunky games have that I think people, you know, I've done it. You go on, you play 10, 20 hours of Morrowind and you're like, oh yeah, you know, it's really fun, it's cool. It's like, oh, well, why aren't I playing it still? Why do I go back and play Skyrim for 100 hours instead?
You know, I have a weird love for Oblivion. I could play that so easily. And it's at the point where I enjoy the clunkiness of that game. Like, if I shoot someone with a bow and arrow and they kind of have this half gravity fall and they go like flying, I just find that very cinematic and fun.
I just think I just think it's it's that thing where like people will hate on the most recent game. Elder Scrolls 6 will come out and everyone will talk about how Skyrim is the greatest thing of all time, which it is a very, very, very good game. But like all of a sudden Elder Scrolls 6 will be bad and the thing, because you don't look at it with the same level of like critique or something.
I'll tell you what, after Fallout 76 came out, my appreciation for Fallout 4 was just through the roof. Yeah. But I was like, oh my gosh, Fallout 4 was actually way better than I gave it credit for. I mean, we made heaps of Fallout 4 content, but all the obvious flaws that we pointed out, they looked so small next to 76, man.
Yeah, I think that people sort of hot take Skyrim sort of like they'll approach the sort of Skyrim's the worst in the series, and I just, in terms of gameplay, I kind of disagree. Like obviously,
I think 99% of people who take the piss out of Skyrim, which to be fair we do plenty of as well, will never choose to play one of the other ones over Skyrim if they were told to play a game right now. Most of the Morrowind lovers aren't opting to play it. Like, I could be crucified for this, but they're not
that's
playing
true.
it right now.
Me included. It's just like, I love Morrowind, but for different reasons. A lot of it is it's carried by the lore and the setting and the design and going around and seeing the cool stuff. But to be fair, everyone's like, oh, you have to play Skyrim modded. It's like, yeah, you kind of have to play Morrowind modded too, man. Like, to look good or to be as well executed as you want it to be.
I can't do chance to hit. That's my big no.
Yeah, it's just, that's not...
I really don't like that. I have to set my luck to 100 or something just to...
It's like, I get what they're
Just
trying
to
to
play.
achieve with that. They're trying to... But, like, at that same time, it's like, there are better ways you can innovate to it and achieve the same thing. It's different. It's for its time. It's a game made in 2002. It's, like, nearly 20 years old. Like, but, yeah, at the end of the day, I don't know. I just feel like people are kind of kidding themselves with this stuff. And they're like, I don't know.
Yeah, the lore, extract the lore and the setting from Morrowind and give it all of Skyrim's like physical mechanics, not necessarily talking about stats and all of that stuff, but just physical gameplay. That's the ideal combination, probably.
Yeah.
But
I've
physically playing Morrowind.
I've got a hot take to share that I read last night. So I'm sorry I can't read your username. I can't find the comment. It's been drowned out, but it actually made me think a bit. And they basically were saying that adding custom spell making to Elder Scrolls 6 is a bad thing, and that spell making is a bad thing. Yeah, and it made me think that, because obviously I love spell making, and I think if you make it really hard to unlock and you have all the checks and balances, you can make it work. But if I were to play devil's advocate against myself and try and side with this idea that spell making is bad, you could say that it has the same issues with enchanting, in the way that there's no unique spell tome to find, unique spell to buy, because you can always just go and make one that's better than what you find. Do you know what I mean? It's like that kind of like hyper customizable, I can make any spell I want.
I agree. It's the same thing. Like, I'm sure, basically, I think the same problems people have with like, with the lack of spell making can mostly be remedied by adding more spell variety and actually adding more spells. So, for example, if Skyrim, when people are like, oh, the magic isn't as good, a lot of the time the real like complaint is that, oh, there's only 3 Atronach spells and a Dremora Lord, and then there's some necromancy. Whereas if there was all of these different Daedric summons and all of this kind of stuff, or like what do the mods do? The mods don't add spell banking in, but they add a lot of variety within the spells. But arguably, it also makes everything visually look more interesting. Like, you have the difference between like, the frost spraying and stuff, and Ice Spike, Icy Spear, the Icy Whirlwind, and so on. And they have those different sort of, when they hand make spells, they can have extra effects to them. Sometimes it's just like, yeah, I'd like touch spells back, but it's like, that's an easy remedy. Just make a touch spell. You don't necessarily, the spell making component would be, a large part of that is focusing on like, area, magnitude, all that. And like,
I suppose what you could do though is you could make it kind of the same as uniques when we talk about gear, like weapons and stuff. But you could make it so there are lots of spells that you just can't create anything like. Just make a bunch of unique spells, and then if you have spell making, perhaps it's for things like, let's just say you're a master conjurer and you have the magicka supply to say, okay, in one spell, I want to cast this spell, and I immediately get a full set of bound armor, a bound greatsword, and it summons a, clan fear to help me. And you just cast it, and that all happens at once. I don't really think that like diminishes spell uniqueness
it doesn't,
in other
but
areas.
I feel like it's adding a whole mechanic to do something. You can just go like, bound armor, bound clan fear, or whatever.
It depends. In Oblivion, for example, bound armor was like by piece, I think.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So like you had to actually, that was cool. You could make a spell that was like the full set and things like that. Or you can mix spells together like fear and fire, for example. The other thing that they would have to balance and think about is that I know Skyrim had problems like with illusion magic, for example, not being able to affect enemies at certain levels, and you had to like always dual wield expert spells and so on to get the most out of it. But if you could really play with the magnitude, perhaps with custom spells, you could kind of push it up a bit. Or Do you know what I mean?
Out of all of the things, the reason I started to agree is like out of all of the reasoning and stuff behind it, if there's no spell making in Elder Scrolls 6, I'm not really going to care as long as there's like, spell variety, and there are so many other areas that I think that are way more important, like, adding like better perk trees and branches and more like gameplay dividing things, and arguably like, attributes or stuff like that. Like there are just so many other areas. I think spells making the advantages of spell making are smaller compared to if they just added a whole lot of spells. Like it's
but they can easily do both. I mean, Oblivion had both. Oblivion had heaps of spells and had the spell making.
Yeah, but like they did, but like in terms of like the visuals and the cool feel, and which is part of it. But I do like that. Like there's no icy spear in what's the name, or there's no way to have like the lightning storm cells and big charge thing and shooting as this one leg stream of lightning.
But perhaps that's why spell making could exist, and it won't have the same uniqueness as some handcrafted spells do.
Yeah, but
like it's.
I would just use the handcrafted cool ones over the sort
but
of.
perhaps you can make one that's stronger.
But then that's the problem of
different...
the spell making kind of thing, and that the tomes stop being. The unique ones stop being useful because the same problem we have for enchanting that they're sort of saying, right? That
No, but say the massive storm does area damage or something, but then you can go and make your own thing that's like a projectile that does more. I don't know.
It's just kind of like, what's the difference of making it versus just having the spell that's there? If they go like, here's a area damage master and
because sometimes you want to have
just tweak the magic cost and damage and you know what I mean.
I remember in Oblivion you had like frost damage for area was just this huge wall, and the only way to get a wall that would literally sweep through a district of a city and just kill everyone in it, and you really feel like this super master mage, was custom spell making.
Yeah, but that is that sort of like, I guess I don't know, like it's just, to me that's such a small
it is
thing. I
small.
think the handcrafted spells, but lots of them are better. Like everyone kind of likes to go.
I'm not arguing against that. I'm not
just
saying I don't want handcrafted spells. If we're acting like we have to pick one or the other, then sure.
It's kind of like people I just like, look, people kind of like to like shit on casuals or be like, oh, any element that makes sense something more casual or accessible, like, oh, it has to be worse. It's worse. It's like, no, a lot of the time it's better, because guess what? Maths is boring. You're playing a video game. You want to get immersed in the world. I don't want to be sitting there going, oh, I've got to tweak my magic cost for this damage to this, that. Yeah, it's fun to do it to some degree if you're really into builds and stuff. For most people, even myself, when I'm not thinking about builds, it's fun to just find a new spell, learn it, and go, oh, I've got enough magic to cast it, bang. Oh, but it looks way cooler than anything in Oblivion.
Here's the thing. I can understand the issues with it, which is why I kind of agree with him and said so to begin with. But we'd be lying. Hold on. We'd be lying if we said that spell making took away from Oblivion.
It didn't take it away.
I think it was either a thing you didn't touch or it added.
Yeah, they weren't going to add icy spear kind of cool things in, and like they weren't handcrafting the spells as much in Oblivion or something.
That's what I mean. It's kind of like a different context.
Yeah, a different time. But that's why I'm saying going forward, I kind of agree.
But yeah, potentially.
It doesn't need spell making.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Agreed. I agree with both of you.
Yeah, nice.
Cool.
He agrees with
Friendship Magic. Spicy take. Every single fictional story, as well as our own universe, is canon to the Elder Scrolls lore. If TES cycles keep cycling through Kalpas, each one somewhat different to the last that came before, eventually every single possible universe will come into existence. So Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and My Little Pony are technically canon, and the Daedric Princes explain why concepts such as corruption, destruction, and madness exist in all these universes.
So this is the monkeys on the typewriter, right? That eventually they'll write Shakespeare.
Yeah.
You've heard that analogy?
I haven't, but I can make sense of it here.
I don't even know where to go with that. I guess
what they're getting at, like, forget all like the haha, like other, like, so Lord of the Rings and so on. It's just the sort of idea, and it's kind of the idea behind like Coda and so on, that just people's own experiences in the things are valid and shouldn't be cast down as like not canon, and that theoretically, like, using Kalpas, using the retcon systems that are in there and all of the metaphysical laws of the Elder Scrolls universe sort of allow, between like Kalpas, Dragon Breaks, Unreliable Narrator, and all that kind of stuff, allow for theoretically like different versions of each universe. Like theoretically every mainline, the reason it's the really like sort of meta, oh wow, the fourth wall breaking, this is a game, but like every single game is a dragon break. So like all of the things happen. So for example, Champion of Cyrodiil, you know, it becomes hero, becomes Sheogorath kind of thing, and then there's the Dark Brotherhood listener, and all of those things, all of those quest lines or the events that sort of happen from those quest lines happened at some point. And the only really way to explain that is either you can go like, oh, Dragon Break, or you can go, oh, they were different people or whatnot. But that way, it kind of everyone's experience is valid. And I generally kind of like it. It's a spicy take because a lot of people's minds hate it.
I'll tell you what, my mind is just sitting here thinking about custom spell making still. That's all I'm thinking about, because I'm thinking about fixing enchanting as well, because you could just scrap enchanting, but you could also just make weapons that you find in the world stronger than anything you can enchant.
Yeah,
and more unique with effects that
we're
you
not
can't
going to
enchant
loop. We're
with.
not looping, boys. We're going
looping,
to the next.
No,
that
but I'm just
enchanting point,
saying-
just one thing I will
but
say
that's
on that
true, you can
is
do
like
that.
most systems and everything in a game are there to like provoke, or like you want to get like a feeling or some kind of accomplishment. So also, even it's a hard discussion with enchanting or spell making. It's like, okay, fine, like don't do enchanting, which I kind of like the idea of finding more powerful items, but then you've also got to have some level of incentive to enchanting, because it's like, oh, you know, you can do all this enchanting and then you can like make like all this subpar stuff, whereas any other character can just like pick up the cool weapons and stuff which that are much stronger. You know what I mean? There's got to be like some level, but I think they can go like laterally.
But that's
It's
like saying that everyone who plays Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion will just use the strongest enchanted weapon in the game. Like, you can go scroll a list of the strongest, and they don't.
No,
So,
but like most
similar
do.
thing.
Like a lot of casuals. Unless you're into builds, like I'm going to use bone mold armor for this. A lot of people do just end up, you know, upgrading their stuff and so on, and going for the stronger things, or they won't, unless you're using glitches. It's like that whole like cope, but we would go and like, you know, make smithing glitches so that we can make an iron sword be like super good and viable.
But let's talk about like Umbra, for example. Like, I can't remember exactly, but let's just say Umbra is the best
Drew
sword.
hates this.
No, hold on. Let's just say Umbra is the best sword
yeah.
for the sake of the argument. Not every one-handed build in Oblivion uses Umbra.
Yeah, no, but
There's
lot
just
of them.
no way. Plenty can, but a lot you just don't have to. And I don't see why you couldn't do the same thing.
Well, in
where it's
Oblivion,
like-
you kind of get,
because you're either arguing one way or the other, and if you're arguing to get rid of it, then you would also
I'm
agree
just
that
saying-
everyone would just use the strongest thing, and that would reduce variety because people can't choose the gear they want because everyone will just stat max, which isn't true.
but it's weaker. Some of the things just
I don't think he's going to enchant that. I
don't think I can do this live on stream, can I?
No,
but they're
you can't.
just not. They're just not. It's about making things like viable. Like Skyrim, for example, you have you can take for granted because through enchanting and smithing and stuff like that, you can make a lot of things viable. So you can use a lot of those different things and stuff. My like you can make enchanting good in other ways or spell making.
It just has to be.
It just has to have
and balanced.
Yeah, but it has to have other purposes too. Yeah, it's a big. This is a giant thing.
Yeah,
It's just kinda
I think I'll make a video about it because it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, Drew will watch that video over and over and over until he falls asleep.
That won't take long.
Um,
I'm kidding.
Okay. Here's a really hot take. Mitchell Viola. Morrowind, mechanically, has the best combat and most tense fights in the series. Also, Alteration is by far the best skill in Morrowind. It was nerfed way too hard in later titles. But that is the hottest take in the way that like no one's going to agree.
I need to have a drink.
Dude, no. In a thing like... I mean, look, there is nothing, I guess, more tense than the idea that you're slamming this monster with a sword and you're doing no damage and it's missing and you're like, oh my god, what's happening to me?
That's pretty tense.
But that's
the more tense and frustrating the combat, the better.
Yeah. Here's this. I don't know if this is a hot take. It's more a critique. This is kind of blending it. There's not enough hot takes. We'll have to we need to search for more hot takes in this list. But the Elder Scrolls severely lacks emotion. I mean, an entire civil war breaks out and there's no emotional trauma or anything that suggests anyone cares. There's no quests that give actual consequences aside from the Shadow Shield clan that truly show emotion. You can slaughter a whole family and the surviving member simply scoffs at you when you try to interact. No characters ever cry. Your spouse is hardly more than a follower. And the saddest moment in Skyrim is when Todd Howard comes out with more updates for the game and ruins your mod order. But
that's actually not that much of a hot take. There is quite a lack of emotion. Like, a lot of it is very straightforward. Of course there's emotion. It's a game with heaps of stories in it, so there is some. But you know when you're being carted into Helgen and there's the kind of like, not now, get inside, and like, oh, but I want to watch the soldiers. That kind of energy in that set piece was really cool, but you don't really see a lot of that later on.
It's a fine line, because the more like
the more you do, the more set the game is.
To guarantee someone has an emotional reaction, you kind of got to do a lot of setup and so on. But the more freedom your game has, the less likely they're going to have it set up in the perfectly same way. That's what happens a lot in Skyrim. Is there's moments that are theoretically emotional, but you're just picking up stuff while it's happening, or you're like playing with a new sword you got or something. It doesn't anchor you in that certain way.
Because I guess one thing you could say is that it depends on the game, and if you have one of those games where you're talking about that look more like a family tree with different choices and stuff leading to different places, but it's a bit more linear and has less role playing. I mean, look at Fallout 4. You can have emotion because your story's kind of set. There's I won't spoil everything, but there's Father, there's all the stuff, there's the Institute and so on, and the cinematic things with that towards the end of the game that can evoke emotion,
and how he's actually your son and all of that. I'm sorry, but you've played it by now.
Yeah, fine. I mean, fine. Anyway, yeah. There's all this.
So we're being spicy today, aren't we?
Hot take, I'm going to spoil the series for you.
No, I mean, I kind of do it. I don't think it's a hot take, actually, to say that you should have played it by now. Mm-hmm. But, yeah. It's
no, I agree.
That's what happens when there's heaps of emotion in a game. But I actually agree they could add a lot more to the Elder Scrolls to make you care during certain side quests and stuff. Oh, but then again, they do try to. Like, think of the Sinding quest when he's saying, "Oh, I killed a girl, I lost control," and all that. Like, there are moments.
Yeah.
Or like, don't kill in solitude.
Plus, like having NPCs react negatively to you depending on what you do. There's a lot of work that goes into making NPCs really interactive in that sense. Like, it's hard to account for all the potential things that you could do to mess with an NPC or their loved ones or whatever. That is hard to execute in terms of development.
Well, here we go. Here's a new one. W. Gen Pool. I think the Skyrim retcon of changing the Nord pantheon to be more traditionally... He put retcon in parentheses, in quotation marks, and it's like, it technically isn't... It's not a retcon because you're continuing forward and there's a theoretical way you can do it, but it's just, you know what I mean, like choosing a little bit. Changing the Nord pantheon to be more traditionally imperial is a good choice and fits much better into the world than every human race differentiating pantheons, especially since how connected the lore of the Nords and Imperials truly is. And someone under it says, not to mention that's literally what happened with the Norse IRL with their conversion to Christianity. But that's a spicy take, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there are elements of it that do make sense because you've got the idea that they've been imperialized over time, and if you're kind of going with the idea that the Nords, a lot of the time they kind of like Norse cultures and Saxon cultures in the real world, you've got a lot of their architecture was built out of wood. It disappears over time, like the ancient stuff, so the ancient Nordic stuff. It does make sense for a lot of it to be hidden away if they've become imperialized. But the idea that they've been kind of holistically imperialized across the whole province doesn't really make sense.
Well, in the Second Era, they still did all like the Junal and so on at the Second Era time.
Yeah.
But you could arguably, ever since Tiber Septim, it could make sense. But one thing I guess to say, even just talking, I guess, saying that it fits much better, that arguably to some degree that could make sense, because when you have an empire that unifies everything and it's unified for 400 years, it's very strange that places stay so isolated and their beliefs don't change. Like, so for example, like that happened kind of everywhere. Like the Saxons come and invade and then they end up being Christianized themselves or so on, and that kind of happens like everywhere. The most sort of popular ideas kind of go to the top and get adopted everywhere, and it's harder to keep like little isolates. So, and arguably they should. Like, I think it just comes down to it's just like the ancient Nordic pantheon stuff is just a lot cooler and gives them a lot stronger theme or identity. But I guess you could probably logically make the case as to why they're imperialized since the Conqueror.
But the Divine's pantheon hasn't been influenced really at all. I mean, besides when Elysia made it, the Empire's been all over Tamriel, and it's not like they suddenly adopted saints from Morrowind or...
Yeah, but it's the dominant one. It's the conquering force in the same way that Christianity adopts...
You literally just said that the Romans invaded somewhere and then took on... Or someone invaded somewhere.
No,
the
but they got integrated by the dominant thing. And then, yeah, but what I'm saying is a dominant thing. Compare it to Christianity. Imperial Divines is your Christianity, essentially. It came and it went everywhere, and it ended up basically conquering everywhere that it was. Like, it became the dominant faith, popular religion.
But at the same time, it does tend to transform depending on where they've gone.
But a lot of
because you get variation. Yeah, not totally. You get variations. I mean, this is a really simplistic view, but a bit, if we're specifically talking about the Saxons, as I mentioned before, a big part of what endures is literally just who decides to build out of stone. The second you start building your religious places out of stone, they're there forever. You don't forget about them. They remain there. I feel like the Nords, there should be a lot more surface level, accessible to everyone, places of worship to the old gods, rather than them inherently being underground and forgotten about.
Just to establish, I 100% agree that, I think that it would be far more interesting, even if you had, a conflict, which I sort of suggested in the ideal Skyrim, it's that you have, the Eastern Nords being really traditional, old Nordic pantheon, and then the West accepting more imperialized ways. That would be a very interesting setting. Mm-hmm. But I think the imperialization stuff can all make sense. It's just not as interesting. Mm-hmm. Just,
I don't know if
just not quite so smooth of transition.
I don't know if this is a hot take, but outside of the parts we were talking about that are realistic, for example, different cultures influencing each other is realistic and would happen. You would expect that. But I don't care about what happened in IRL history as far as making that a canon choice or having it. If someone says to me it's better that the Nords did this because IRL, Vikings changed like this and Nords are based on... I don't care.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I care from a like I said, a realism standpoint
or
of
authenticity.
Yeah, authenticity, and that makes sense because this is generally how cultures, interact and what happens when that happens. But yeah, I don't really care just to make things match just because.
Oh, for sure.
There are so many factors about an Elder Scrolls universe compared to a real universe that will drastically change the way cultures evolve and everything. Having gods and having magic is gonna make it so vastly different to the real world anyway.
There's things too, and when any Elder Scrolls lore or changes or future things they add, you can critique it from two angles. One being just taste and what do you think is cooler, and the other is does it actually make sense? Is there a logical line of conclusion? So,
sorry, I just showed a heaps hot take.
All right, hit us.
Well, I don't know. I think I just hyped it up, but I was like, I disagree, because it just makes me think of Andromeda and open world stuff. But Netist says, I actually get the sentiment here, but again, don't agree. Points of interest are far too dense, especially in Skyrim. I remember in an interview, Bethesda said they designed Skyrim's map so that the player was never more than 30 seconds away from a point of interest or something to that effect. That's a bad design philosophy. It makes the map homogeneous and destroys any real sense of exploration or discovery. It's even worse in a game where one of your main selling points is modding. Adding modded locations just further clutters an already cluttered map. Elder Scrolls 6 needs larger swaths of wilderness with no points of interest, similar to Breath of the Wild.
I think you can scale your points of interest.
Drew's going to agree now.
I think you should scale your points of interest. Every 30 seconds, you shouldn't be coming across a major ruin or something with a huge, say a Dwemer ruin right next to a Nordic ruin that you can see one from the other. And it's I understand that
idea.
If
you want to walk on grass, get to a football field, dude. Just if you want to... I played a game for interesting stuff.
But you can have environmental storytelling in very simple ways. A point of interest can be finding a couple of dead bodies, a note on the body, and then a werewolf nearby that kills them.
Exactly.
What I'm saying is would you with Skyrim, I wouldn't critique Skyrim on its execution of its world map. For the most part. There's tiniest little things you can maybe make adjustments.
Dude, I want to add stuff. If anything, there's not enough... beefed up. We talk about holds and stuff being more beefed up, and there should be different keeps here with different guards and things.
Yeah. If anything, that's a problem. Well, if the scale problem is probably more about the actual size of cities and stuff, and
I understand the idea that if it's referring to major landmarks, I understand the idea that, say you've got a drastically bigger world map, that when you're adventuring for a little while, and then when you finally stumble across a major landmark, like a ruin of an old civilization, that feels like you've had to search for it, as opposed to just going 2 meters off the road and there it is. But at the same time, it's like, at least add plenty of other things to do. Don't just have like 10 landmarks on the whole map purely because you want scarcity to make those things more interesting, because you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there.
Yeah.
Because if a point of interest is just like a cave or an alchemist's shack, like I want these kinds of things around the place. I don't really want to just, you know.
Yeah, there's no way in hell I would fault them.
Just-
I think this one thing, and maybe this is just me being, I'll be like a Bethesda simp here, and everyone will like, oh, Bethesda, you're just you're just sucking the sweat of Todd Howard's balls. But I think in terms of like game world design, especially as in Skyrim, they're pretty damn good. In terms of a game, like Skyrim is heaps enjoyable to go around. Fallout 4 even, or you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't. Bethesda's problems are no way, I think, like the world space design and areas.
Even Fallout 76, you can give that props
Yeah,
to.
exactly.
Like, there's plenty
Dude,
of
what you
interesting
just
stuff
said
around.
is gonna make for the best soundbite clip. Like, someone please meme that, do something with it, put it on Twitter. I'm begging you.
You're just gonna get a low effort JPEG.
Fine, I'll be happy with anything.
But yeah, not a Oh, here we go. So here we go. Okay, now this is like, I can't actually really respond to this hot take too much, but like, like Pond says, the lore behind the Ebonheart Pact isn't actually that bad, as there are many small details that make the story of its founding seem like a cover-up and an attempt to promote cooperation for an alliance that was made out of necessity. Now, that's a spicy take, I'd say, and I disagree from what I have read. If there is extra stuff that you can show that smooths it over, like, I would agree, but I think on its foundational points, you've just got the most diametrically opposed races. Like, team up together necessity. I think it is realistic generally. People aren't that, like, 4D chess smart generally. Cooperation behind, like, there's a very rare few times in history or something where it's just so diametrically opposed people, just like, yeah, we've got to team up to fight a common enemy or something like that. And it's not even like, oh, a common enemy that's coming to invade Morrowind, Skyrim, or they're fighting over Cyrodiil, you know? And like, who should be emperor?
Look,
it's a struggle
it's
for
obviously
me, man.
Contrived. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I did look into all of the lore of the characters involved and the leader of the Argonian Shellback group that is essential in the coming together, and then the discussions with Almalexia and whatnot. And I mean, it obviously makes it fit a bit better, but it's always going to be contrived.
I
whether you
mean,
like
like
it or not.
even Euron Skald King, and it's like he teams up and he gets summons Izmir Wolfarth, like literally the hate elf incarnate character, and then they go and like, yeah, let's help the elves from in Morrowind. They're literally, I don't know, man. I don't buy it.
I think someone just wanted to see Scott go on a rant.
Want to see me squirm, but
Here's a spicy take from Riley V. Going to come in with the spiciest take of all. Honestly, killing Paarthurnax is the right decision, and anybody who chooses not to is selfish. He says, no day goes by where I'm not tempted to return to my inborn nature. While thus far he has been successful at combating his dragon nature to dominate through meditation, if you consider the fact that he is immortal, then there is actually a statistically significant chance that someday, like anybody can, he will make a mistake and all of Tamriel will suffer for it, even if it is thousands of years
these
later.
are the kinds of people like real like.
Paarthurnax is a hero.
This is like
Let him die that way.
This is like some Minority Report, like sort of like crime prediction kind of thing. It's like, oh, well, we found this person, and they're like 10% more. They've got like, you know, an expression of the psychopathic gene or blah blah. It doesn't matter, man. You can't just go on these like eugenics crusades and kill people. It's about their actions. If they commit a crime, then you react to it. You can't preemptively be like, I'm going to execute him because, you know, he might turn or do something. Like, I mean, you can make that decision from a role-playing angle or whatever, but you can't really morally justify it. You could go...
What if you had someone, though, who had, like, a record of... Because, like, Paarthurnax was around when dragons were doing some pretty bad things. Okay, so imagine it's different, and you actually have someone, and they're like, "I'm a serial killer. I've killed 50 people," and they like meditate on a mountain
For 4,500
like,
years plus.
Yeah, but anyway, but they're like, every day I resist trying to be a serial killer and murder people.
I reckon
I just
you can
have to resist and resist and resist, and then make that serial killer like Superman in terms of how much stronger than everyone else there is. Like, I can understand the sentiment, but at the end of the day, I kind of agree with you in the sense that you can't. It's a very slippery slope down High Hrothgar when you start, thinking about who should be preemptively
You can
killed.
judge them on actions they've done. Like, for example, if your argument was, oh, he did bad stuff in the Dragon Wars, therefore I think he should pay for his crimes. Like, arguably, that makes more sense. But you can't really predictively go, oh, they're more likely to, therefore... The worst things ever happen from that kind
Obviously,
of mindset.
you can't take away the fact that he was crucial in turning the tides of that war.
Yeah, well,
without Parthenax's involvement, you wouldn't have won the war, period, and you wouldn't be solving this problem. So
yeah, that's the kind of Blade's angle. It's like, oh, he betrayed once, well, he'll do it again, even though he's sitting on a mountain for 4,500 years, or he's an old man. Like,
I guess the other thing is in Tamriel, there are many powerful forces who could potentially stop Parthenax too. It's not like he's just like a nuke waiting to explode and nobody else has a nuke. Like, there are crazy powerful entities in the world. There's the Sijic monks. There's Daedric princes. There's like all kinds of people.
Well, there's literally the Dragonborn.
And the Dragonborn.
Like,
but even that can be sent again. Let's just say the last Dragonborn wasn't there. Like, you could just have a new Dragonborn be sent as an avatar of some god to kill.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I guess that is a spicy take, but no,
it gets dicey. It gets dicey, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It gets dicey.
So, bad. Yeah. All right. Devoted Tales. Here's a more lore one. So Boethia is the line between Trinimac and Sun, and encouraged the rebellion against lawful authority on both sides. Sun died because Trinimac doubled down on siding with Auriel, but he'd been changed by the cognitive dissonance into Morlock. Boethia embodies means of victory, rejected by both. Okay, hold on. Maybe we need this. I don't think I should have even said that one. Just because I think that needs a little bit more of a discussion. I need a little bit more clarity on what he's trying to say there. Anyway.
I mean, yeah, that is something to think about. I guess essentially being the right-hand man of each god, Auriel versus Lorcan. And then obviously we've had the theory that a lot of what Boethia does is kind of a love letter to Lorcan.
But then why would he?
It could be something to think about, but there's not much to go on.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay. Well, maybe we can approach that in a lore thing or something sometime. Just re-clarify, I guess.
Here is a hot take by username Michael. It's not me, though.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The hero of Kvatch made a mistake by stopping the Grey March and freeing Jiggalag from his curse. It will result at some point in the future with everything falling to order.
Man, I don't know. It's such a far-off thing. Maybe it's been 200 years and nothing's happened.
So, I mean, when he was initially around, the Daedric princes came together and cursed him. He could be stopped again. I guess the idea that you've unleashed it maybe is a problem.
Yeah, I guess from the point of a mortal, helping Sheogorath is not necessarily like the right thing to do, is it? I mean, if you think about it, like, what do you get? Like, who cares if Sheogorath's realm is constantly destroyed and he has to rebuild it? Like, from the inhabitants of Tamriel's perspective, it's not like you're doing them a huge service by ending the Grey March, right?
Yeah. Now I just really, because now I talk about this, I really want to find it somewhere, but it's more or the less that about Sheogorath being not that.
I think I saw this.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Now I need to race and find it. Hold on,
I think I
saw a take by Newberry Crunch at Newberry Crunch. It says Sheogorath is my favorite god XD # cheese for everyone.
Yeah.
I think the take was Sheogorath sucks, Namira's better or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I guess
obviously they're unrelated, but
yeah.
I mean,
it's a hot take. I would say I would say generally that people don't like, if you dislike Sheogorath, the majority of the fandom would be against you on that.
I think it's important that Daedric princes are never too well defined.
Yeah.
Like,
sorry, I just read something else, and we've got to do that one next. Go on.
I think we've talked about it before, that a lot of what we like about Sheogorath is how unpredictable and how he can theoretically be the scariest Daedric prince when he wants to be, but the emphasis on his whimsical side makes it hard to see him as much more than a happy-go-lucky kind of skipping his feet type of character. So to an extent, I agree that like that is definitely a side of him, but I don't want him to just be that, Like, I think, yeah,
I agree. I guess this hot take, shitting on Sheogorath, I think is relatively spicy, though I feel like it's a safe space said here, because like I kind of openly don't like. I'm over it. I don't like hate it or anything. This is the thing. I like most things in Elder Scrolls. I'm not a hateful person. I just execution can be better. I just get over the memes, and someone's there. I think someone.
You got beef with Wes Johnson or something?
Yeah.
I think the Sheogorath it's like the Joker. It's like saying, "Oh, I love Jared Leto." It's like, well, Jared Leto is just one way you've seen the Joker.
Yeah,
you want to see various manifestations of him.
Yeah,
not just the one. You don't want him to just be defined by
all right.
how he's portrayed in the game.
Here's the next one. So from Riley on Twitter, Khajiit are cringe.
Refuses to elaborate.
That's why. But hold on, like. It's fun. It's fun to kind of agree. Like I really like the Khajiit and all the execution, but like the element. I guess they're saying like the
Puss in Boots element.
Yeah, when like, oh look, I'm a little cat with my little turban hat
I'll
thing.
be honest. I don't like the whole Khajiit have wares if you have coins.
Yeah, there you go. It's another.
I don't like that.
But it's a bit.
That's cringe.
Yeah, it's a bit of the sort of like dividing line between like what's like fandom generated, like which argue a lot with Khajiit. Same applies to Sheogorath. Sort of, influences. That makes it cringe versus the...
Yeah, you can't really blame them for the surface level memes. Like, I don't hate Nords just because every time you see one, you're like, oh, hey, you're finally awake, bro. It's like, well, some memes just kick off, but yeah,
it's like
it is a bit brutal.
Fusrodar.
Yeah, it's like...
Fusrodar used to be a huge meme around the time Skyrim was actually out, and I can remember being in school and people would walk in the room and say it, and it was just a bit like... Bit cringe, like blow you away.
But I'm trying to figure out exactly what they mean by the Khajiit being cringe.
It's just
there are so many ways you can take it, and I don't know. I need to think about that more.
Yeah, well, it can just be a little bit like where this sounds like such a a low tier insult, but like the furry race, and there's all these different varieties of like cats, and then cats already have an element of like internet meme cringe that I think people like already add to it. They're like, people take a picture of their cat and they'll be like, oh, it has wares or whatever, and like attach it to the meme and stuff like that. And I think all of that kind of stuff helps people in their head implement like, oh, he's house cats in Skyrim, or like, do you know what I mean? And they become, to a degree, somewhat. I sometimes find this with all like more comical looking beast races, or I think just direct translations, just that the Khajiit and even Argonians to an extent, a lot of beast races like that can sometimes feel a little bit like funny, unless they're really bestial. Like, for example, it's like comparing like, if you go like Warhammer and there's like Skaven or something, they are quite literally like this like rat evil thing, versus Khajiit are very much like, I'm a human, but like with a cat face on.
Yeah, with it and a tail.
That's why,
other than that,
it's why a lot of the Alfiq and the Dagi rat, the smaller ones that kind of look a bit different, I kind of treat them differently to the ones you meet in Skyrim that just look like a furry human with like a cat head and a tail.
Yeah, because
it's a bit cosplay.
You can almost see Skyrim and ESO, Khajiit, and Argonians as just being another mortal race, but with a skin put over it. It's basically identical.
I mean, a lot of, just with that example though, a lot of Skaven are like that. I know there's cool concepts.
It's the way they act.
But
these games, they're not.
They are based on just like a human shape with a big rat head.
Yeah, but it's just the sort of it's different. They're more like hunched and so on. They look
they seem more like rats than like humans.
If you can easily cosplay
Yeah, for sure.
you know, with the Khajiit, like you could kind of like do the makeup on the face, and the rest of it you kind of do the makeup fur and just stick a tail on. Like it's kind of why I prefer Khajiit, Morrowind, Argonians, and Khajiit with the bipedal stuff, because they look more like beasts rather than just.
I mean, it's kind of like the Falmer, isn't it? How they have their unique hunched stance, and they just feel so different.
Yeah.
To
But
humans.
look,
Like,
I like Khajiit and so on, but it is funny, and I would say they're probably susceptible to the most amount of cringe out of all of the
they're
Elder
held
Scrolls
up
races.
by really good lore.
Yeah, hell yeah.
I think playing in any fantasy setting and sci-fi, playing more into, if you've got a beast race, playing into the bestial elements of them is always going to be more interesting. Across the board, you know, like any example I think of, like a book I absolutely adore called Perdido Street Station, which is a random reference, but the beast rate, like when you see the bird creatures, they're incredibly awkward on land, and they're really, really like gross to look at. And the same with, like, you know, the Volginoi, which is kind of like the frog-like creatures. They can kind of only really exist if they're sliding around in a pool of their own sludge. And things like, basically, like, if you play into like you personify the animal elements of them, it's much more interesting than taking a human and sprinkling a few bits of beast on them.
Yeah, that's like.
So you work your way up from the beast, not down.
And that's
from
what
the
makes like
human.
Argonians though more interesting. The fact that they're like the lizards with hiss sap and so on, that makes them these different kind of, you know, all of the different like biological functions that are exclusive to them. Any of the human parts aren't really interesting. Or the best Khajiit.
But they're also unique to the Argonians. Like one thing I'll say where I somewhat disagree is I don't like when beast races have their lore built entirely around the beast that they represent. Like if everything about Argonian culture went back to somehow like lizard traits, I wouldn't like that. Or if everything in Khajiit culture went back to feline traits, which it doesn't, and that's why Khajiit lore is cool.
But it kind of does in the way that their culture, like their gods and stuff, are all cats.
There's nothing about but what I'm talking about is things like their views on Daedra and Aedra and how they consider them all just spirits and things like that. I'm not talking about framing it like they have creation story with litters. Of course, there's all those kinds of themes, but I mean, if we were to talk about Skaven as an example, when you read about the Skaven, everything's kind of like, I'm a rat. It's like I'm cruel and treacherous and corrupt.
Oh yeah, but that's I guess
I'm a rat, or it's like, and I'm dirty and I don't have any like pity or remorse or compassion.
Yeah, but that's anything when you color an entire race with like a homogenous sort of.
This is what I'm saying.
I think the fun food for thought is how a beast race would deal with sapience. You give them sapience, you give them that ability. Like the idea that a rat, like a creature, like a race of rats, they're going to conglomerate in massive packs, and hygiene is not going to be very important to them. Things like that. They would manifest rather than necessarily human-like traits on them. But obviously, once you give them sapience, the race is going to change. It's like Khajiit aren't going to be doing very cat-like things all the time.
Just to be fully clear as well, I'm not advocating that they should have more human-like traits. I'm just saying make it unique. Mm-hmm. Like, orcs have traits that are uniquely kind of orcish, and they have their own culture, but it's not based off an animal. You know, like I could make a bird culture and make everything to do with birds and flying, but when you have things that are like, I don't know if cats are obsessed with moons, but I don't know that there's any reason why Khajiit being so into the moons is directly involved with them being cats biologically. I think it's just a cool thing that they decided to give that society, right? I mean, I may be wrong. I'm not a cat person.
There are elements. It's like you do have to stretch it a bit, but the idea that during the twilight hours of dusk and dawn, cats for some reason tend to go batshit crazy.
What about, for example, another one you could do is like moon sugar seems pretty far removed, like sugar and cats.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, absolutely all for that. That's all.
I mean,
I think that's better.
This is kind of tangentially.
Yeah, but better than what? Like, what were we suggesting that was not?
Oh, like if everything was just heavy leaning into cat things or feline things.
Well, I don't think they should be crapping in litter trays and kicking it around. Like, but like you take elements and
I guess what we're arguing for really anyway is that biology has tangible restraints in any sort of culture. So if you're like, if all of a sudden you're a society, it's like, don't have stairs in a society of snake-legged people that have just got snake tails because they won't use them. You would have like ramps and stuff, like those kinds of considerations.
Don't just give the snake men human feet.
Yeah, that just makes it feel cringe. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like,
I mean, we like beast feet. That was another hot take, that beast feet were cool, and we don't think that's super
we
hot.
love beast feet. I mean, while we're on this topic,
you're really doing yourself dirty this podcast, aren't you?
Since we're on this topic, I think I saw a comment from Swit saying Argonians shouldn't have tits.
I agree, 100%.
I mean, yeah. Whatever.
I mean, I don't think it's cut and dry.
Yeah, all right, here we go.
No.
I need my scale titties.
So what's the main argument for not, I assume, is because obviously they're not like real life reptiles don't. As far as I know, you know, like their biology is very different. They lay eggs rather than getting pregnant.
Yeah, and they.
But
go
at the same time, like there is a quote in the lore that says it's not confirmed, but one of the theories for how Argonians were created was that they were raised up by the Hist from the ancestor lizards because they saw men and elves and wanted to mimic them, their clever hands and walking feet. So if Argonians were designed to mimic humans and elves,
they saw
who's to say it wouldn't mimic their torso and their
yeah, but then why not their lips and everything else? They just saw the advantage of the mummy milkers.
Well,
and they're like, we need them.
To an extent, they've adapted a lot of human and elven traits into Argonians. Especially if you use that as an example to give them the different legs and feet versus Morrowind. It's like you can almost cope with that change by saying the Hist just chose to adapt them to look like this.
I think I saw a continuation of that thing that Khajiit should have six. They should have six boobs. Because like Khajiit have like six nipples and stuff, and you know what, you do it, bro. Like I'm always for the more. I would rather my beast or / alien races or non-human races look more non-human and have more interesting features rather than being closer to human, because it just looks comical. You can do. You know what I mean? Like put on a head, you'd start looking like some Dorothy the dinosaur level stuff. You just, like, you know, with tits. It's just like, do you know what I mean though? You just stick on your tail, paint yourself green and put on your little conformed head thing, your lizard head.
Yeah.
You know? Look, everyone goes like lizard men conspiracy theorists. Like the idea of lizard men's cringe, right? Like as a concept, it's not a cool concept. Like that they like, I'm just a man, but a lizard form, like some Star Trek alien. Like this looks some like antiquated, like 1950s, 60s thing. Sure, you can go, it has some like charm and like, arguably it does it better like Star Wars. There's a lot of better execution, but still like you can look at some of those things and go like, haha, like, you know, it's kind of an antiquated thing that you're attached to. And the same thing applies to Argonians. But if you were playing a new game and like I suggested something and it's like, okay, guys, like let's do a bird race. It's a crow. It looks exactly like a human. It has tits, everything, human feet. It's just kind of covered in feathers and it's got a beak. Dude, you'd be like, it looks like a character from BoJack Horseman. This is not a cool race.
I agree.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean though?
Same.
You're just forgiving people just forgive Argonians and shit, and because
you see it all the time on like I mean, I don't really use Pinterest that much, but I can imagine it's there as well. But all the different designs of beast races where it is just like, I'm a human and then my head is a praying mantis or a dog or something like that.
But yeah, I was definitely playing devil's advocate with the because obviously I do prefer beast races to be much more bestial and not just look mortal. I swear.
Beast feedy. Oh wow, we might have to do like a part 2.
Yeah,
I think we should do multiple
3
parts
for hot takes.
We should probably curate next time, because like going through, we're just a bit lazy this time. So, yeah.
How many more do you want to do? You want to do one more?
Let's do 2 more, but let
2 more.
Yeah, let's do 2 more, but we'll find.
Let's look for some.
Oh, actually, no. This one was a legit good one. Actually, I think it's the same guy that asked at the Ebonheart Pact. This opened my eyes a little bit to this one. I thought this was good. From memory. So let me read it again. The Allmaker isn't an Anu analog in Skull mythology. When compared to the Anu Padme binary, he's a Padme analog. The Allmaker is Shor, father of Shor, who's responsible for Mundus, i.e. the land, where live the water, tree, beast, sun, wind, and earth that the Skull love. The adversary is the Anu analog. At the last, he will come as the world devourer, okay, Alduin, and he seeks the ruin of the Skull, a tribe of humans, by stealing the gift of Mundus. The adversary is Old, the time dragon, who for the Northmen ends the world. But if you actually do match it up, like their Nordic, ancient, especially ancient Nordic view of Akatosh Alduin as the dragon kind of being, and Anu being the force behind it, whereas all of the Skull kind of stuff, the Allmaker is appreciating a lot of the Padmaic things that all exist and so on, and especially when you go like the animal totems and so on. So it's actually a pretty good insight. It's something that I think maybe we just haven't thought about it in that way before, but I feel like that's a very fair point that the Allmaker is a Padme analog as opposed to.
We should
It's a good
make a
take.
video about
Yeah,
it.
good take.
Yeah, so that's a good,
Interesting.
Flesh it out a bit more.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely a good take.
How about Elder Scrolls 6 won't come out for ages, so everyone should be hyped for Elder Kings instead.
That
was a legit take
yeah.
by Elder
If you're
Kings.
into
Elder
Crusader
Kings.
Kings RTS games, then
If you
this mod is the way to go.
yeah, if you're it's definitely fun, but it's a type of game like you got to be. I like those kinds of like management-y sort of things. It's not, don't go in expecting Skyrim, but yeah, it's cool. It's cool with that stuff. Actually, there was another game take. Something Elder Kings, and it made me remind me of something, but I can't quite put my finger on what I meant to say. Look, I will say this. Some guys like the series is on borrowed time. If Elder Scrolls 6 does come out, it will decide the fate of the Elder Scrolls 6. It'll either blow us away, save it. And basically what I want to get across, there's heaps of like sentiment about the Elder Scrolls 6 being a flop and like, oh, it's going to like kill the franchise when it comes out because it won't live up to expectations. It's just not. Everyone's going to buy it. No one is, especially 15 years. There is a whole generation of people that have gone from age like 1 to 15 in the time that there's been a gap between this and Elder Scrolls 6. They're going to have their first Elder Scrolls game be that. They don't care about your Morrow Boomer stuff, your Oblivion Boomer stuff, or your Skyrim Boomer stuff. Because, dude, you're a Skyrim...
Sky baby.
No. Dude, you can't be a Sky baby and
True.
15 years old. You're like, you can't. Skyrim is an old game. It's vintage. If you gave it to a kid now, you cannot not call a 10-year-old game an old game. It's old, dude. Fallout 4 is old, man. It's like what, 7 years old? Like,
And look,
it's
Elder
old.
Scrolls 6 is going to live up to the hype. I think if you're hyping it as the greatest game of all time, the greatest experience any human being will ever experience in their entire life, then maybe simmer down a bit. But if you're expecting another fantastic Elder Scrolls game that evolves on previous games and is much more grand and immersive and all of that stuff, you're going to get all of that no matter what.
I hope so.
I don't think it's possible that you wouldn't. I honestly, even if there might be gripes about, oh look, they've streamlined a couple of things, they're not going to streamline too much. They're going to be faithful, and the fact that the technology is going to be 15 years ahead by the time it comes out.
Imagine if all the super heavy role playing stuff that they say they're going to do for Starfield happens, and Starfield is actually a bad game and is received really badly, but not because of the role playing, and they're like, the role playing stuff didn't work.
By the way,
Time to get rid
I
of it.
found the Sheogorath is lame and Nimir is better, like Ashton Becker, but there was a comment underneath Lockie that was just like, Sheo is overrated. Swear 90% of the love is just because he's quirky. Also, the Wabberjack is shit after the novelty wears off. That ugly stick has been gathering dust in my weapon rack since my first playthrough in 2011. But yeah,
True.
I guess that was just adding to the point, yeah, that what you talk about, but it's just like, it's hashtag haha XD I'm quirky. Like that's him as a Daedric Prince.
Yeah.
There is one more.
One more.
But Gardakan says Dark Elves are not the best race.
Agreed.
Duh.
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
they're the most fleshed out race,
It's-
which gives them an advantage.
Yeah, it's also, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's a further thing we need to think about, but there's actually a division between like technically like race and culture. Like if you're like evaluating what a race is, like usually like if you look at the biological components, like all of like, what like abilities or things that are unique to it, and therefore I guess the beast races have a big advantage and everything. That's
I don't think you can separate,
but
you can't.
But yeah,
separate.
We're
always talking cultures and cool societal stuff and timeline events and
and high elves are the worst race is another hot take.
I think when we did our ranking coolest ones, it actually was like low on all of our lists.
Yeah, because it's kind of just Lord of the Rings high elves, and if you don't have the interesting culture stuff, if you do just kind of adopt the Lord of the Rings high elf aesthetic, they do just become Lord of the Rings high elves.
I feel like I didn't have them low on my list, but
I think you had them mid
forgetting.
to higher, but we obviously the final list we had to compromise on.
Because you got to give credit to the Sigiks, the Dureni, the Aelids, all of that kind of count. Unless we said Aelids doesn't count as high elves.
I don't know if you do have to give credit to the races or whatever, before. You know what I mean? Like
maybe if that were the case, then maybe that would have been
like more. I don't think we counted the Kaima one talking about.
But no one does that really in real life either. Like no one's going like, you got to give the Yamnaya culture credit because they like end up spreading all across of Western Europe. Like no one thinks about it. They don't care. It's about the later cultures like that come from it, the ones that are like identifiable as a individual kind of thing.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of the Hot Takes podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not next week, but at some point we'll definitely have to do a hot part two.
I think we'll need to do multiple parts. Honestly, we could go for hours.
Yeah. Spicy take live stream.
We need to do a full episode just on spell making anyway, and I'll just use a PNG of myself so I don't have to be here for it.
Get the glasses with the eyes drawn on. All right, well, thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoyed it thoroughly. Social media links are in the description, and we look forward to nerding out with you again next time.